Hey there, everyone. Welcome back to the podcast. We are so glad you're with us this week. If you remember, we are kind of switch things around here on the podcast, and we're doing great conversations with people who are living from rest, not from rush. And we have one of our certified coaches with us today, but she's more than just certified in our process. She has lots of tools in her tool belt. So, Annette Bechtold, welcome to the podcast, my friend.
Thank you, Teresa.
This is going to be a fun conversation. Annette and I have a lot in common, and you'll find that out as we go through the conversation. So, just a little bit about Annette, and then I'll let her tell a little bit about herself. Annette has been in this executive space and kind of the work that she's done for a long time. She's made some recent switches, and she has switched over to a leadership and executive consultant and coach. So she puts on both hats when she's doing the work that she does. But Annette, give us a little bit of a backstory of like even the last few years, how you went from the industry that you were in to the work that you're doing now.
Yeah, thanks, Teresa. Gosh, I can't believe how fast it's gone. Actually, just the past few years. So, coming into it, I had pretty much. I started at the age of 15 working in the insurance industry, and had this drive to learn and become an expert, and did all the things. So, almost 40 years later, was totally entrenched in sort of the hamster wheel of it all, just thinking about just doing more, responding faster. Everything was a speed up, right? Certain certain things sort of came into play, maybe the positions I wanted or the things I thought I was striving for. Didn't happen the way I thought, or I was planning things should happen. I think God had a different plan for me and had many of the hey, look over here moments to me in that journey. And sort of gave me a pause, which I
Mm,
never took. And I think that was the big thing. I was always so busy. There wasn't time to really reflect or pause or say, is there something more, or is this what I'm supposed to even be doing? It was just do, 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 do. And the more I did, the more that came to do. It just
mhm,
piled on. And but I never stopped to question it, never stopped to think about it, thought I was doing the right thing.
mm.
Um, but it was it wasn't even right for me. You know what I
You
mean?
know, you mentioned something there, Annette, that I think probably many listeners could relate to is you were in the industry for 40 years. And so
Mhm.
just that you got into something and you just kept doing the next thing that was in front of you within
Right.
kind of that tunnel vision, and then at some point you look up and go, wow, it's been 10 years, it's been 20 years. What did that feel like? What were questions you were starting to ask yourself, maybe even after 30 years or so doing the same thing?
Yeah, so that is a great question in and of itself, because it was no longer at one point I look up, I've been asked to do so many things, and my answer was always sure, and how fast. Not not is this something that that even aligns with who I
Mm,
am, or what I should be bringing, or where I'm going. It was just always yes. And I think that, I woke up one day and had said yes to something that wasn't even on my trajectory. It wasn't what I
wow.
wanted to do. It wasn't where I wanted to go. And it sort of derailed all the plans I had in my head, and what I saw for myself, but I did it anyway
Mm,
because, again, I think your point about you're so long in an environment, you start to define yourself by what you do and not who you are, because
mm,
you are only as good as the last thing you produced, right?
wow.
That's the nature of business.
Mhm.
And so you start to have that as your definition, so that it makes those yeses easier, but it doesn't make them necessarily correct.
Ooh, makes the yeses easier because here I am and why not, but doesn't necessarily make them correct. And I know within the industry you were in the insurance world and kind of in a specific area of that. Um, let's dive into a little bit because I do know a lot about your personality as we've worked together. Um, but tell us these tools. I know you know the strengths well, and you're certified in that, and you've done that even before we had met. You've learned some about the Enneagram, the tool that we love. But when you look through the lens of your personality, even of just that, I said yes. I did the next thing within my industry, this tunnel vision. Where do you think some of that's come into play for you in this rush piece?
Oh yeah. So, learning about the Enneagram was great. Like strengths was wonderful too, in that, it described what I was doing, like what my inclination to action was. Oh, I'm an achiever. I like to communicate. Like it's all of these things, and maximizer, more, more, more.
Yeah.
All of those things are in my top
And
five.
they're
So
your
it
strengths.
explained.
They're who you naturally are. But when you
Right.
put them in your industry that you were in, it's almost like they become the curse, not the blessing.
Yeah, and you are absolutely right about that. And I often say to many of my coaching clients, look, it's really not your weaknesses that get in your way. It's your
Mm,
strengths that are used
wow.
unproductively. You know,
So
your
let's just
strengths,
say
you're
that
using your
again for
yeah,
listeners. It's not your weaknesses, because, right, when you use the tool of Clifton Strength, right, we have the weakness,
yeah,
the ones at the bottom of the list, the ones at the top of the list. But actually, it's the affirmations that we can get drawn into, especially
yeah,
in our Enneagram types, the way we are forward moving types. We get drawn into the affirmation of, well, if I'm a achiever, I'm a communicator, I'm a
let's just
wooer,
keep
I'm a
achieving.
whatever. If
I'll
I
just
do
keep
more of
achieving
that,
because that's
yeah.
what I do. Yeah, and
So
and
say
so
more.
it's really the unproductive use of those talents, and you get
Mm,
drawn into it, and you're right, you validate it based on, "Well, but that's just how I am." Well, yes and no. I mean, granted, your weaknesses don't get in your way because, frankly, I don't do any of those things. Like, I'm not that person. It's so
hmm
hard for me to behave that way. Um, I'm never gonna do it, so how could it really be an obstacle? But the things that come naturally to me, when I don't use them in the right way, yeah, that's what gets my way. And being, the Enneagram really was one of the tools I hadn't been exposed to a lot, that the process really helped me to see more of sort of the motivations and the why and how I show up unproductively. It really uncovered that in a lot deeper fashion. And so that made a difference. There were many ahas in there, as an Enneagram 3. And you and I've talked about this a lot. Like, what does it mean to constantly go for success, but success in what? So, and
mm,
I think that's where being in an industry and sort of wrapping your identity around what you do becomes dangerous.
mm. So knowing that forward moving type of the Enneagram 3, and you know being in an industry for as long as you were, yeah, more. Sure, I can do that. Sure, I can achieve those things. Um, yeah, that
Yeah,
that
so,
that was the
there are
thing.
wake up calls that that you start. I mean, your original question was like, when did you sit back and go, "Hey, what the heck?" So when I took well, I was asked to take a different position, which would have put me down a different path, which was not one I ever wanted to be on, and I said yes. There were many of those days where I said, "Hmm, why did I say yes?" What prevented me from having the courage to just say no thank you, and I'm going to do something else. um, and there was a lot of soul searching about that, probably over the last, I would say, 10 years.
Mm.
I was not a quick mover. So I mean, you get really entrenched in something and you get comfortable, and you think about
Well,
disrupting that comfort.
Where does fear come into that too, Annette?
Oh, yeah. So I had a huge fear of becoming nobody.
Mm,
Right? So
wow.
you build up a reputation, you wrap your identity around what you're doing, you work to become an expert and help people. I mean, good work, not that it wasn't, it was
Mhm.
great work. And there were things that we were doing and helping and making a difference. But, you know, you wrap yourself around that and you go, what would I get? It would be giving all that up.
Mm.
And I think that fear of giving that up and not knowing what's next, it became comfortable. I know who I am. Everyone else knows me too. You know what I mean? And they know what to expect. And now you talk about venturing into some starting all over, basically.
It's the
Uh,
identity, right?
yeah,
So many of
yeah,
us, and I know the listeners can relate, so many of us begin to identify ourselves by the doing.
yeah,
And
yeah,
after 20, 30, 40 years, we just trudge it out because we're like, yeah. And
yeah.
it takes courage. I commend you because it takes courage to say, I think there could be something different, but that fear of, but who will I be? What will I be known for? As you were talking about, I'm an achiever, I'm a communicator, what will I be known for? And from the faith perspective, to look at it and say, yeah, am I loved by God no matter what? That's the deeper questions that we start to get into. And it's not the work that everybody wants to do, to say, okay, I'm living like this. And in seasons of life, and I know, 40 years is a long time, even personally, right?
Yeah.
So there's a lot happening, children and grandchildren and marriage and all the things that are also a part of that. Yeah. What did you see and discover in those seasons in that way?
I mean, there were a million signposts,
Mm.
millions that I chose to move past, right? I mean, I think I wrote about it in one of my in just my latest blog post. I remember there was a point where I was traveling 2 weeks out of every month, and my kids were in elementary school, you know, and my husband was also traveling. And so we were passing. In fact, we passed on an escalator at O'Hare one time, but
Wow. That's a
we had
moment
to
right there.
coordinate all the stuff, and but coming home and my little one running up, giving me a hug and saying, "Mommy, I forgot what you looked like." Like
I
that was
read
like,
that. I read that blog post
oh,
and
my heart.
my gosh, heartbreaking, right?
Yeah,
But yet you're
but
stuck in this place of like,
yeah,
yeah, what was that like?
being really torn about what is the most important thing and the most important people for you, but also providing for them as well. And I think a lot of people sort of get stuck in that providing for others
That's good.
mentality. But because you're providing financially, you're doing a lot of things, but it's when that um, prohibits you from the personal interaction that is all people will remember. Like
Mm.
nobody remembers like, oh, money was tight here. But you remember the fun things he did, even if
Mm.
they didn't. It doesn't have to be a big, huge vacation or what. It's sitting down and playing cards every night with the
Right.
kids, or doing something that matters, or being there when they were upset, not being gone, right?
Mhm.
And so I think it's those hard things to balance for sure,
And we all have
and
our
it's a
stories,
struggle.
right? As parents. I
Mm,
mean, we all have our stories where we go, oh, that wasn't a season where I was showing up. I had my rush hat on in there. Now,
yeah,
granted, here I am stuck right now in this thought of, because I've met your husband, of the two
yeah,
of you waving at each other on the escalators as you went by. Like, that's a moment, right? Or your
yeah,
daughter sharing that. I have another good friend who talks about a story similar of coming home and, his son saying, you're not my dad, you're my uncle, kind of
Oh,
teasing it back to him
yeah, but
because he'd been
still,
gone so much and he
yeah,
knew the switch that he wanted to make and had to make. Now, I will say this, when you get to that place and you're like, life is hair on fire, as I said, and I'm not where I want to be. I want to see life differently because I'm in a different season. So, second half of life
yeah,
stuff, or I just can't do it like this anymore, which is
yeah.
kind of my story. Then it doesn't happen overnight many times. So, what are steps? Because I think that's important as our listeners list of like, yeah, I'm over here in the rush place. What are steps that you felt like you purposely started taking to kind of change your seat on the bus?
Yeah, I think it was, our good friend Terry
Mm-hmm.
from the Real Life Process. One of the things that she said to me when I joined this group and we were talking was she said, "So, yeah, don't beat yourself up. You did good work
Mm-hmm.
for yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Now it's time to do good for others." Right? And so, and I think that was a moment in thinking about purpose, right? What am I here to do? And it was really creating some space to think about that. Like we're so busy going and doing, to what end, right? And who and what are most important. And I think in one of the things I love about the process is sort of having this space and continuing to make this space and make the space a priority to stop and go, okay, what am I trying to do? What am I focusing on? Who's important to me? The who part is huge because we get so we've every a lot of people are really good at task lists,
Mm-hmm.
like, but what about the who, and who are you influencing? And
Mm.
what are your values? What do you value most, and how are you showing up?
And who do
And
you
if you're
want to
not,
influence, right? Um,
yeah,
as we
exactly.
move in seasons of life, I think in that beginning seasons of life, we know that our greatest influence uh, is the little ones that might be in our home, right?
Yeah.
And, that's all we're focusing on. Watching my daughter do that right now, like
Yeah.
this new little grandbaby, and I'm seeing that her whole world, as we know, has flipped upside down, and nothing more matters than the comfort, the care of the toddlers, the young kids. Then you move into another season of helping them develop, if you have children and
Right.
their character and their values and are they going to do sports or do music or do all the things and you're kind of in that mode. And even in both of those early years of adulthood sometimes that we go through, um it's about somebody, right? But it's this inner circle of family, nieces, nephews, children, all of that. And then we get, and so we just do the work because, like you were describing, I'm providing, I'm doing. Then it feels
Yeah.
very rushed, all of life. And then
Right.
you've moved into a season where the kids are raised, you're speaking into grandkids, you're doing some of those things. And your husband, like my husband and I, are kind of the open nester, empty nester seasons,
Yeah.
and you start asking different questions. And that doesn't mean, I love that you quoted Terry, it doesn't mean that what you did was wrong. So I never want people to feel like they need to beat themselves up when they decide that, that's different. Like that was part of the experience and learning to get us to
Yeah.
here.
Yep.
So, what are just some actionable practical steps, Annette, that you took? Because I know now you work as a leadership and executive coach and consultant, depending on what hat you have on. You do some
Yeah.
speaking, workshop leadings, still connected in many ways to the industry you were in, but
Yeah.
you're making the choices of how you show up there and where you're being. But what are two or three practical steps that if somebody was listening that you did to start exploring, not necessarily because they want to become a coach or do whatever, but just to move yourself out of and gain some awareness?
Yeah. So I think, the start was really paying attention to things you're drawn to that bring you joy, that
Mm,
aren't necessarily attached to what you do today. So just taking time to notice what are moments, who are people, what are situations where, oh man, I just come alive now, rather than it's just the drudge of what I normally do. Not that it's bad. I'm used to it, and I can be perfectly content with that. But what are some new moments that are sort of bringing you where you reflect back? And so I would say number one is take time to reflect every week. What brought you joy?
mm. That would be
It could
so
have been a
helpful for
moment.
somebody, right? That's stuck in a season of like, this isn't really where I want to be. I don't want to be doing this, or
Yeah.
um, I've got some things that are out of alignment in relationships or whatever. Is just to do that weekly reflection piece to just start to capture some of their thoughts. Um,
Yeah, and I think one of the things, since communication's so big, of course, I've got to tell everybody everything, all the time, right? So, but that was a way for me to notice. So, like knowing yourself, man, if I've finished doing something and the first thing I want to do was run out and tell my husband all about this, well, it's great to love, like you can feel your own energy. Where's that
oh,
energy?
that's
When
good.
you have this great energy,
Yeah.
notice it, put it down. And you don't have to do anything about it, but sort of, yeah, take that time to record it. And then look, if you do that every week or every day, even, or even just on the days where that emergence for you, and you're like, man, this was good. Well, what was good about it? Right. And but look back over time and you'll start to notice some patterns.
Mm, I love that. So reflect is one thing. Set aside.
Yeah.
If you're in the crazy still, that's okay. Be
Yeah.
okay with that, but start to reflect a little bit on a regular basis, whatever feels good,
Yeah.
daily, weekly, and then record it. Like
Hmm.
write it somewhere, cheapo notebook on a computer. I know you're a planner girl. So
And
if you talk to Annette, eventually it's going to be write it in the planner because she's a planner girl. Um, but get it recorded down so when you're
right.
ready and God invites you and opens up a little more space, you can actually look at what you've recorded and go, wow, I have a lot of energy around this, or I, uh, you know, this is coming up for me if that drains me. And
Right.
that is a drainer. So, and I've heard those words, I can't think of them right now, like, what's a drainer and, whatever the positive is, but come up with your way of, yeah, just reflecting and recording for a period of 60 to 90 days.
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
what would be something that you felt like then after you kind of knew that for yourself?
Well, then exploration, really sort of trying things, looking into where could I be doing that, whatever that is that brings you that great energy or that joy. What were those things? Is there a way I can do more of it every day? Right? How could
Mhm.
I do it every day? What would that even feel like? So kind of getting excited about it, but really exploring how can I do more of it?
Mhm.
And then what are some things I could try? And then what are some of the trade-offs? What would I give up? Because you're also going to notice those draining,
Mhm.
what's sucking the life out of me today?
Mhm.
Like,
Yeah.
I don't want to do that anymore, right? Where could I start to make some small trades?
Mm. Small trades. Yeah.
Mhm.
But that noticing of the energy is going to then say, okay, if this is
Yeah,
me transitioning out of a position within an organization, which is what you were desiring to do, then starting to ask those questions. Does it feel good to work for somebody else, but just in a different way?
right.
Does it feel good to
Yeah,
be on a team? Does it feel good? Would I want to work for myself? Would I want to create my own thing, whatever that own thing is? Noticing those gifts and talents. Maybe you're the best woodworker ever, and you're like, could I make a could I make an income or that has a purpose and a plan for me to use this talent and ability. Um, so for you, that ended
yeah.
up being took you on a journey to really start to do some training and coaching and some different things. How did some of that come about?
A lot of it was by word of mouth. I had been, a leader and an executive for a lot of years, and I spent a lot of time with my people because that to me was the most important thing. So it was fairly natural. Um, so people would come talk to me, and when I worked in an office, I worked excruciatingly long hours because I would be available all the time to everybody,
Mm,
right? And people would come seek me out and seek advice or just kind of vent or whatever, or how do I handle this? Or, even when it wasn't technical stuff, but just personal stuff or interaction with other people. And so, you know, that was interesting. I also had people say, "Oh, this is really what you're good at," and reassuring you about sort of that type of thing. And when I started to take classes, or learn something, I would talk about it. Just talk about it. It's amazing. People be like, "Ooh, really? I'd like to do that. Can would you?" And you can practice all kinds of things,
yeah,
and see if
exactly.
it's something you like. You know what I mean? And that's what I would say. You even talked about the woodworker, right? If you love that, start making stuff.
Yeah,
Talk to people about it. See if
yeah.
there's an interest. Find
Yeah.
places
Take
that
it
you
to
can
the,
do it part-time.
local whatever market and see if somebody
Yeah,
buys it. Like it's the
exactly.
exploration that even will,
Mhm.
and do I have energy around that? No, I love doing it for a hobby, but I don't want to sell things. Like that's part
Exactly.
of the journey to say,
Mhm.
does this bring me, does this bring me to a different place of rest that feels good? And you may say, I really do want to stay in the career that I'm in. I just need to add in some other things into my life. So it's that
Yeah.
exploration to the journey from living differently into a place of rest doesn't always mean a career change. For you, it did, because of
Yeah,
lots of different things that came together. But
right.
you began exploring coaching and got training and certified. And now, when when was the official like I'm out of the industry, I'm into my own work and what I'm doing? Has it been 2, 3 months? What's it been now?
Yeah, I would say, that sort of actual really, I feel like legit. You know what I
Legit.
mean? In the new space, probably was really, more at the maybe about, yeah, even like 90 days ago.
Yeah.
And then because I really made that switch of, okay, here, I have a couple other obligations. I'll do my good work there, but that's not
Mhm.
who I am, right?
Yeah.
Like, that's not what I do anymore. And being okay with it. So it's hard to let go when you do something for a very long time. And that transition, it doesn't come overnight for sure. And you
And
have to
I love
be,
that you said that because
yeah.
I think that's for many people, even we talk about these two words, living from rest instead of from rush, right? Like
Mm,
people are like, oh, I just got to break all ties and stop. Small incremental steps. And for you, it was almost a year, I would say, of
yeah.
transitioning out, letting go. I remember when you and I were talking, you're like, I have my last thing that I'm doing.
Yeah.
Because as many people do in industries like insurance or real estate or medical or
Yeah.
whatever, if you go in and you're that person, you not only were in the industry, you were in the associations that were in the industries, and you were giving all of your best to kind of the worldwide association pieces of this industry. And that's what happens to many people. So be okay with it taking a while,
Yeah.
no matter what you're doing. I was, in a couple of different spaces that I couldn't just go, I'm done, cut the strings. That's not healthy either. Um, it's moving slowly into some of these places to make the lifestyle choices that you want to make.
Yeah. Yeah, you bring up something really good, and the word that jumped in my head was deliberate,
Mm,
right? So, being very deliberate means you're giving thought to things. It means you're taking time with things. You're the tortoise, not the hare. You know what I
yeah,
mean? You're
yeah.
you're you're methodically taking steps and exploring along the way and going, no, yes, and figuring out the right path step by step, stone by stone. And I think that that's that's where you come to the other side and go, yeah, now I feel really confident because I've had the time and opportunity to really feel like I have solid footing, you know.
Mm. And I think, as you say that deliberate piece, and this again is going to sound like, oh, but find tools that will help you. Find,
Oh yeah.
for, whether it's things like learning about your personality, whether it's hiring a coach, whether it is
Right.
using a process like the real life process, find something that becomes a framework that you can lean into for a season. And you've done all of those things. I've done all of those things, but this kind of work to change a whole pivot of I want to live differently in this
Yeah.
season of life, whatever that season is. Like, you know, yeah, it could be all the seasons we've mentioned, all the decades, but find the support that you need to do those things.
Yeah.
So,
And you and I've talked to, and you bring up something really important. So you're right. Um, the support is really important. And I think I spent most of my time running alone.
mm,
Now I had people around me for sure, but it was my own race. Like, you know what I mean? Um, and when you stop and really are very deliberate about and listen and um, understand sort of where you're called and what fits and what doesn't, and you're taking the time to really let all of that soak in, and I think that you get to the place where you can feel not like where you feel like other people are additive. Like I need a community. I
mhm.
need like
Well, and
I
you
don't know
were in a lot of
what it is about
communities.
feeling like I can do it all or I don't
Yeah.
need anybody or whatever.
And
But
within our
you do.
industries, right, we develop those communities. And what you were
Yeah.
saying, I was reflecting as you were saying that, depending on, all the industries we've talked about and different things, you develop your community there. But it feels like if you would step out of that, are those people still doing life with me? And many times they're not. And that doesn't mean because you weren't deep friends or you weren't any of those things, but they're in the same boat you are, cruising the same way,
Yeah.
whatever that industry is, and or work environment or whatever. And so sometimes they're one piece of community, but they're not all. And so whether you find that
Correct. Yeah.
locally, in your church, in an online community, in a place, we value, and you hear us talk about it all the time in the podcast, we value community. I value
Yeah.
people getting the support they need. I actually was meeting with my spiritual director yesterday, and I said, it takes a team, it takes a whole village for my life. And so, I have a coach, I have business coach, I have community that I'm in, and I think that's one of the things that we forget because
Yeah.
we forget like how much God meant for us to be in relationship. And we think that that work environment is that relationship. And many times it's not. And it's not enough because you probably are going to switch careers at some point. So I just encourage people, and you've done that. And that's been a huge part of your story to say,
Yeah.
okay, I'm going to build community outside of this whole world that I've been in forever.
Yeah, yeah, it is sort of a wake up, but because you get comfortable again, we come back to that comfort piece, and you just assume, and it's because you have a lot in common, and the work is what's in common. But if you never take it beyond the actual work, then are they really the community? Not
Yeah.
necessarily, right?
Yeah.
And I've gotten so much out of like all of those things, having a coach, being part of a community of people who are trying to do the same thing, who just pour into each other for the sake of pouring into each other
Hmm.
to help you move forward, not for any gain of their own. Like that is a really different thing
Hmm.
than you would have in most workplaces because there's that competitive edge
Yeah. The
in a work.
strategy of it all, right?
Right, exactly. And so, you know, we were never meant to do it by ourselves.
Mm-mm.
We weren't made that way.
Yep. It's not
And
how we were designed. So,
yeah, so we need each other, and there's so many great people that can, give you
yeah,
such
be that.
amazing
Like,
perspective.
yeah. So, well, as we wrap up, I want to talk about how you're giving that support a little bit to your clients. Just fill
Mhm.
us in a little bit on some of the current work that you do, and then how could people connect with you? And I will say, Annette is certified in our process, so it's one of the tools in her tool belt. No, no means the only one by no means, but it is one of the things. So if you're like, oh, she's got this process. She does. She has this framework and process. But tell us about some of the other work you do and just kind of how you show up with this newfound space that you have.
Yeah. So a few different things. So definitely, this process is something that has just been amazing and incorporates into all the work in pieces or self-standing for.
Yeah.
It depends on what people need. I spend time with individuals sort of looking for what's next, who are in transition, or who just want to live a better life. Also, executives, entrepreneurs, people who are looking to build their community and be successful. Um, I love spending time, and a lot of my work is with teams as well. So, teams,
Hmm.
and especially management teams, and especially middle management, those people who are managing the frontline workers who make success for the business every day. They are often a forgotten group who are the most critical to whether people stay or or not
Yeah.
in your company,
Yeah.
and to how work gets done. So spending time with them in both group and individual settings, learning about what their great contributions are, where they can contribute best, and where they need to partner up, and how to make that happen in a really great space, but also not forgetting the personal side.
Yeah.
And
That's what I
so
think your
really
sweet
working with
spot is.
companies who want to invest in people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That middle management piece, like you said, they're the lost and forgotten, right? We focus on the C-suite level, or we focus
Right.
on the keeping the workers in the task, but that management piece I think is such a sweet spot for you. And
Yeah.
the presentations, the workshops, all the things. So I really encourage you to connect with Annette, get on her email list, get some of her free resources. Where would they need to go to do that?
Yeah, so they can just go to forteatlanta.com, forteatlanta.com. I had to think about
We'll
Atlanta. How
put
do
it in
I
the
spell
show notes, but yeah, forteatlanta.com, because you're
Yeah,
from the
and if you
Atlanta, Georgia area. So if you're
I
listening
am,
in from
but,
that area, that's kind of a
yeah,
local
but I
space for
do
her.
help people all I most of my clients,
Are
probably
not from
80% are
there.
not in Georgia. So, yeah, all over from California to New York. So,
Yeah.
um, the, but yeah, you can, ask to get on my email list. Out there, you'll see some upcoming free workshops that I've got on some different
Yes.
topics. But definitely, would love to also, book a time to just kind of explore and see
Yeah.
where we can help each other. So,
Yeah. So you can find all that on our website. We'll have that link in
mhm,
the show notes, but forteatlanta.com with
mhm.
Annette, and you can connect with her there. Thank you so much for coming and just sharing a little bit of your story. I will say this: I'll never get on an escalator and not think of you now. Like, it's in my mind of like, oh, because you're in the airport and you see all these busy people. That's one
Yeah.
of the things when I travel, and I travel for work as well, but where I look around and just think, where are all these people coming and going from? And so you and your hubby are going to come to mind in good ways. I'll have good thoughts about, wow, this is where Annette used to be. And she's not there anymore. She's doing
Yeah,
it different.
remind me sometime to tell you the story of how I gave myself whiplash on an escalator. There you
Oh
go.
my. Is that possible? I guess it is. There's for another time and another podcast, people. So come
Awesome.
back. We'll share that story. So thank you for being with me, friend, and just being vulnerable to share what it's been like for you, and yet the work that you've done to make it different. So thanks much.
Teresa, enjoy the time.
Yeah. Well, remember that every ordinary day has an extraordinary moment. You just have to look for them. And I love having conversations like Annette and I have had of just, those moments that she's had where she said, gosh, these are moments now I get to notice. Right before we got on, I was just asking how her time had gone. And she said, oh, I got back to crocheting. And I'm like, that's a moment. Like just those
Yeah.
little hobbies and those little things. So look for those, my friends. We'll be back next week with more from the Doing What Matters podcast. We'll talk soon.